What's up, YouTube fam? It's your girl, Mrs. Tony 2 times, and I'm back with another video. In this episode of Hood Tales, I'll be discussing the case of Tia Young, an adulterous wife who did the unthinkable to her husband in an attempt to collect a large insurance payout. But before we get into this video, welcome if you're new here to our channel. Please feel free to subscribe. Click that notification bell to get notified every time we upload. If you're rocking with the content, smash that like button. Share this video with everyone you know. Make sure you watch until the end to hear the full story. Let's jump right into it. George Young was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1974. He was a 1992 graduate of Conway High School in Conway, South Carolina, where he met his later wife of 22 years, Tia Young, whom he would later have 3 sons with. After living in South Carolina for most of their lives, Tia and George relocated to the metro Atlanta suburb of Buford. The community where they lived would be considered pretty quiet and safe. George at one point worked installing security cameras. Eventually, he would go on to start his own security firm, shadowing Atlanta celebrities as their bodyguard. Not only did George own his own successful company, he was also a member of Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witness in Lawrenceville. Tragically, George's passing left a void in his family's heart. The family had their suspicions and wanted to get to the bottom of why this happened. Not only was George a hard-working man, he was a devoted father and husband. George loved his family and would do anything for them. His generosity did not stop at just his family. George extended his hand to a family friend in need, Harvey Tim Lee. Tim, George, and Tia all grew up in the same town in South Carolina. So in 2015, when Tim fell on hard times after moving to the area, George let Tim move into his family's home in Buford. George also gave Tim a job at his very successful security firm. One night in mid-November of 2017, George Young worked security detail for rapper Lil Yachty at his clothing line launch at Lenox Mall in Atlanta. After the event was over at around 11:30 p.m., George began his drive home. While on his way home, George was on the phone talking to one of his employees all the way up until he pulled into his driveway. He told the person on the other line that he had made it home and hung up. Suddenly, what sounded like gunshots rang out near George's home. George's wife, Tia, made a 911 call to report what she might have heard as firecrackers or gunshots. As she was on the phone, a male voice could be heard by the 911 dispatcher telling Tia it was her husband, George, and he was hit. Tia appeared to be shocked on the 911 call and ran outside to her husband's side. The 911 dispatcher told Tia to perform CPR until EMTs arrived, but she said she couldn't do CPR. So Tim, the male voice who was heard on the 911 call, stepped in and began to administer CPR to George. The family friend was telling George to hold on just a little longer. But sadly, by the time paramedics arrived at the home on Montauk Hill Drive, it was too late. 43-year-old George Young had succumbed to his wounds and passed away at the scene. According to reports, George had been shot twice, once in the face and once in the chest. Once Gwinnett County detectives arrived, they suspected that George Young may have been ambushed from the side because he dropped everything as if he was caught off guard. Although George was hit twice, they were only able to find one shell casing at the scene, which detectives found strange. As the investigation continued, reports say detectives interviewed George's wife, Tia, the family friend, Tim, who Tia told detectives and news outlets was her brother, and Tia's mother, who was also staying with Tia and George. In the initial interviews with them, detectives didn't really get any leads. They all seemed just as stunned as to why someone would want George gone. Tia and George's children slept through the whole ordeal. When the news broke to George's family, they were all distraught and heartbroken. They all drove 6 hours to Georgia to find out who could have done this. Despite George's work in security, he had no known enemies, and everything from his security detail with Lil Yachty that night went well with no issues. During a news interview right after George's passing, Tia begged for the person who took her husband's life to come forward. She doted on her late husband and father of her children, wiping away tears before they even began to run down her face. Tia would allude to the fact that her husband may have been a victim of some sort of gang initiation, but detectives or George's family weren't buying into that story. The neighborhood where Tia and George lived was not the type of neighborhood you would expect a gang initiation to take place. George's attack was not random but targeted. George Young was laid to rest on November 25, 2017. Investigators had their suspicions on who took out George Young, and those suspicions were geared towards Tim Lee, the family friend and the man investigators thought was Tia's brother. But it turned out he was anything but that to Tia. When detectives spoke with a neighbor, they told them that after hearing the gunshots, they saw a person who looked like Tim Lee running toward George Young's truck. The person who looked like Tim Lee went under the truck and possibly retrieved something. When investigators questioned him about what the neighbor saw, he admitted that he was retrieving a tracking device that George had requested he place on his truck for safety, because George may have been in some type of trouble. He alluded to the idea that George was illegally dealing weapons, but investigators didn't believe that. Detectives also paid close attention to Tia's actions following her husband's passing. While everyone handles grief differently, Tia showed no sign of emotion after losing her husband of 22 years and so tragically. George's family said Tia was happy-go-lucky after George passed away. It wasn't even as if she was mourning his loss. Tia and Tim's inconsistencies in the timelines of what happened that night made investigators even more suspicious. Tia told detectives one thing and Tim told them another. It was also revealed that detectives found out from Tia's middle son that his mother gave him a sleeping pill that night to help him sleep. Police's theory is that Tia gave all of her son's sleeping pills that night, and that's how they were able to sleep through everything. However, Tia denied such allegations, but the plot thickened as time went on. Reports say that after George had opened his home to Tim Lee and gave him a job, soon enough, Tim and his wife Tia started to have an affair. Investigators believed the affair began in May 2017 or sooner. Detectives found explicit text messages between Tim and Tia talking about their intimacy and relationship, with Tia even allegedly telling Tim she wasn't texting anyone else and she was only loyal to him. Leading up to George's slaying, it was no secret to those close to the couple that their marriage was on the rocks. Tia wanted to leave the marriage, and George was pretty bummed about that. It was also discovered during the investigation that George had a $1 million life insurance policy with Tia as the beneficiary. In one of Tia's first interviews with detectives, she told them she wasn't even sure if they had life insurance, and if they did, it probably lapsed. But later on, it was found out that she called the insurance company just 2 days after George was slain outside their home. With a mountain of circumstantial evidence against Tim and Tia, detectives brought them back in for questioning in April 2018. When confronted with the affair and newfound evidence, Tim Lee requested his attorney and didn't talk to investigators any further. Tia, however, admitted to the affair but denied having anything to do with her husband's slaying. However, police had enough evidence to charge both in connection with George Young's horrific slaying. They were charged with malice hit, felony hit, and aggravated assault. Officers alleged 38-year-old Harvey Tim Lee and 42-year-old Tia Young conspired to off George for the life insurance money so they could be together. Police claim the emotion Tia showed in TV interviews following her husband's slaying was all an act. Tia and Tim pled not guilty and both received no bail. A year later, on April 6, 2019, Tia Young was convicted of felony hit, aggravated assault, and 2 counts of criminal attempt to tamper with evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years plus 2 years. Harvey Tim Lee was found guilty of malice hit, felony hit, and aggravated assault. He was sentenced to life without parole. Both Tim and Tia tried to appeal their cases, but their convictions were upheld. Tia Young has never received a penny of the $1 million policy. It most likely went to the children. Wow, fam, what a terrible tragedy. May George Young continue to rest in peace. My deepest and sincerest condolences to his family and loved ones. My thoughts and prayers are with them. What a shame that a devoted father and husband had to lose his life at the hands of his wife of 22 years and her lover. In my opinion, Tia and Tim had been in a relationship long before he moved in. I don't know how Tia's husband didn't see that, or maybe he did and just played it cool for the sake of the children. In my opinion, Tia Young is a very cold-hearted individual to have done such a thing. She took her children's father away from them, and now she's gone too. Both parents are no longer around. And as for her lover, Tim, grimy is an understatement. I mean, I don't understand how people think these types of devious and lethal plots will end happily ever after. Fam, tell me your thoughts on this in the comments below. Alright fam, that's it for this episode of Hood Tales. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is your girl, Mrs. Tony 2 Times, and I'm out.